This video will deal with the diffusion of innovation. It'll attempt to explain how innovation spreads out through an economy or through a society, and how it becomes adopted and how it changes and becomes established over time. So normally we get an innovation at one particular point in time, perhaps in one particular area or in one particular company. But over time, the idea spreads and may eventually become quite a big change to the society or to the economy. So let's look at what some of the factors, I should say, that leads to the diffusion of innovation. It was developed by Rogers, E.M. Rogers, in 1962, who was concerned about how innovation spread, how it moved from one place to the next, and how it was adopted in different areas, and perhaps some areas were more ready to adopt it and more eager to adopt it than others. Some companies may have innovation as central to their corporate strategy. Other companies may want to hang back, want to stay back and watch what happens before they commit themselves. So there are different approaches to innovation, and this is what fascinated Rogers in 1962, a very early work on this type of material. The theory illustrates how a new invention gains momentum and diffuses or spreads throughout a specific social system. So it looks at how the idea comes about, that's the invention or the innovation, the change, and then how it spreads and how it the spread of the idea can gain momentum. It can become faster in some areas in society or in some countries or in some industries, and slower in others. So what is it that accounts for the rate at which diffusion spreads? Diffusion means a process that illustrates how innovations, that means products and services, production, distribution, marketing, how these are communicated throughout social groups. And here I've mentioned countries, cultures, populations. In fact, you could put in industries. You could even have innovations on a very micro scale within companies. That a company may have a certain routine to make a certain component or produce a certain product or service, and it has a certain routine established. And then someone mutates it, someone changes it slightly. There's an innovation, in other words, and that may spread throughout the company. More and more of the workforce will see this new practice, which will save time and energy and enrich the job task, perhaps. They will see it and they will want it, and it'll spread throughout a company. So we can have innovations at different levels, not just within countries and cultures and populations, but within industries and within companies. Now, the concept of innovation is the introduction of new ideas or modifications made to existing products and services. That's on the production side. Of course, there's also the consumption side, which is the new product which gives the customer or the client a better product, better quality, more durability, better value for money, more interest. So it could be a whole new product or a variation in an existing product, or it could be a new way of producing the product. The point is, it's newness. Innovation is newness. It's the introduction of a new idea or a modification, either to production or to the product or service itself. An innovation can be anything that's perceived as new, and customers are willing to adopt this new innovation. So anything which is perceived as new is an innovation. Of course, it doesn't have to be acceptable to the customers. It might be an innovation that alienates the customers, in which case the product will be damaged, the company will be damaged, perhaps the company will go out of business. They have varied the product in a way that can alienate their customers. But it could be that it's acceptable to the customers, in which case the company will reap the rewards of greater profitability, greater stability, bigger market share, better reputation. The diffusion rate is determined by knowledge of innovation, its suitability, and the potential benefits of adopting the innovation. So the rates with which innovation spreads is really linked to the advantages of that innovation. If companies see a new production process, a new machine, or a new raw material, or a new way of doing something, if they see that as advantageous, in other words, to reduce costs, increase quality, increase market share, increase competitiveness, if they see this new product or new method of production, they see that as advantageous, it'll be adopted. And the rate at which it's adopted will spread rapidly because companies don't want to get left behind. The same with products. If a product is innovated, it may become fashionable, in which case a lot of people will want to purchase it because they want to be seen as keeping up with the fashion. So the rate at which it's determined, the rate at which it's spread, I should say, is determined by the attractiveness of the innovation. And the attractiveness is the physical appearance, the attributes of the product, or on the production side, the ease with which a new process can be introduced and the savings that it can make. So diffusion rates are determined by the advantages, the net advantages of the innovation. And the greater the net advantages of the innovation, the faster the innovation will spread. It'll be diffused at a larger rate. Generally, customers will welcome a new product or service that addresses a need. If customers have a need and sometimes they're not perhaps aware of the need, but they would like to see a new product. For example, customers were not aware of a need for a microwave oven before it was put on the market. Customers were not going to shops, I presume, demanding an oven with no fire, no heating, obvious heating element, that would heat the food in extra fast time, and so on. But once the product had been produced, once the microwave oven had been produced, there was a demand. There was customers saw a need for it, and the idea was accepted and it spread widely. So by and large, customers will welcome a new product or service that addresses a need. If it makes life easier, if it lasts longer, it's more durable, better quality, if they perceive this, then the innovation will be acceptable. Innovation developers must perceive a potential gain in terms of profits and in terms of competitive advantage. So they must perceive this, they must perceive a potential gain. Otherwise, they won't even engage in the innovative process. There must be an incentive for producers to engage in innovation. And that incentive is more profitability, better competitiveness. If they see that, they will engage in the innovation process. So the rate of innovation, of diffusion, I should say, of an innovation relies on the innovation itself. What is the innovation? What are the costs of the innovation? What are the net advantages of the innovation? The channels of the communication. This can be broadly defined as how will the innovation be communicated within the marketplace? Will it be by word of mouth, by advertising, by by demonstration? How will it be communicated? But the channels of communication may also be within the industry, where one company sees another company producing something which is an innovative version of the product, and they will try to copy or imitate that, and they will use their channels of communication as well. So all conceivable forms of channel, from word of mouth through various marketing channels, all of these will be employed to try and spread the idea of the innovation. It'll also depend on the adoption process. Customers have to adopt it. Customers have to want the product. If customers are slow to adopt it, then the rate of diffusion will be slowed down. If customers are fast to adopt it, it'll spread. It'll spread very rapidly, and there will be a lot of the product put on the market because customers are adopting it very fast. So it depends on the customers and their adoption rates. And of course, that in turn depends on the social system. Some societies are very conservative and will want to stay by traditional means. They want to continue to do things in the old-fashioned way. They may not want new products or variations, or they're not impressed by newness of ideas. They want to do things the old ways. So social systems will also influence the adoption rate, and no matter what the channels of communications are, or no matter what the innovation is, if the society is very traditional, then the product will not be adopted very quickly or very widely. Certain products spread quickly, and some take longer to adopt. That's the conclusion of that. Some, perhaps related to the fashion industry, may be adopted very rapidly. A new design for a pair of shoes, or a new design for a jacket or a hat or whatever it is. These may be adopted very quickly, whereas other products may take a long time to adopt. May take a long time to be introduced. The following are elements which determine the rate and extent of diffusion and innovation. The relative advantage. Companies will adopt innovations if they think they're going to gain an advantage compared to their competitors. If they come up with a new way of producing a product that's in competition with other producers, not just domestically, but perhaps overseas as well, then they will want to change very, very rapidly. If they see there is an advantage, that they're going to get a lot back for a small investment, they will be very keen to explore that possibility. So it's relative advantage over their competitors. But it must also, of course, ensure compatibility. They must ensure that the product is essentially the same as it was before. It's essentially taking the customers from before and giving them more. They don't want to alienate the customers from before. They don't want to lose that market. A lot's been invested in building up a loyal clientele. They don't want to alienate the customers. So they want to have compatibility with what the customers expect. They also want to have compatibility in production. If it's a new way of producing something, they don't want to just throw out all of their machinery and replace it with radically new machinery. Not necessarily. They want to see if they can use what they've got. Use the existing capital stock, perhaps vary it, have additions to it, or modify it in some way, but they want to have compatibility in production. The same as on the other side, they want to have the product generally acceptable to the customers. Customers know what the product is, except now it's got this new feature. But also complexity. The product should be reasonably complex, which may sound somewhat odd to say, but it should be reasonably complex, because that creates a barrier to entry. Competitors will find it difficult to enter the market and compete. So complexity is something that companies try to deal. Of course, there is a balancing point here. You don't want it overly complex, because if it's too complex, it may fail, or there might be return issues, or it might be difficult to maintain. There are lots of other issues, but complexity, the customers have to see it as new, not just a minor modification, something which is radical, something which is different. We get this with smartphones, for example. Apple will look at their existing phones and introduce new features, and then launch a totally new phone. They normally do it once a year, whenever they decide. But the extra dimensions they're adding on, the improvements in the camera or in the sound or in connectivity or whatever it is, these are extra complexities that their competitors must then factor in and try to beat. And that's the competitive innovation process. It's important that the customer should be able to try out the product. If it's a very radical product, they're not going to spend a lot of money speculating whether they want it or not. They want to be able to try it to see if it works for them, if it does the job, if it's acceptable to them. And likewise, within the business, if it's an innovation in production, the company will want to see, before it invests in new machinery, they want to see if it can be done, if it's feasible. What are the downsides in changing the production or changing the product? So ideally, they want to be able to trial out the whole exercise before anything positive happens. The customer wants to try the product before they buy it. So before they buy a new car, they want to test drive it to see if it's the car that they like or they want, or it meets their expectations. Should be able to observe it as well. There's a problem with innovating services, particularly services like, for example, legal services. We perhaps employ a solicitor or an accountant, and we do this on reputation. But we very seldom observe that person working. They're given a brief, they solve the problem, and they send us the solution. We don't necessarily see them working on it, but of course they do work on it, but we don't see it. So it's very difficult in that case to imagine how the producer in this case work. What sort of technology do they use, or what sort of innovations have they experienced in their workplace? But observability is important to give security, peace of mind to the purchaser. If it's new product, a new innovation, they want to be able to see it working. They want to be able to trial it, as I said in the previous point, but they also want to see it working. They want to see that others have adopted it, that it is suitable for their needs. They want to be able to observe it. The same within the company. If it's a new development in production, a new piece of machinery, then the people responsible for investment within the business will want to see that piece of machinery working. They'll want to see what it can do. They'll want to see what the upsides and the downsides are associated with that piece of machinery. Now, relative advantage. Let's go across some of these, just slightly different. They are important. So, relative advantage. To what extent is the new innovation better than the previous models? So, you could look ahead for one company producing a product, and it varies the product perhaps every year, the case I mentioned earlier with Apple. So what's the relative advantage of keeping up to date with the new phones that are brought out by the Apple Corporation? Or perhaps if we bought an Apple phone, it could last us 3 or 4 years or even longer, and we don't need to update. But then again, some people would say, well, perhaps the operating system of the phone will be updated, and a lot of the applications that we download and use will no longer be compatible with that operating system. So we're forced into upgrading. That's an argument that's sometimes put forward. But it's not just relative advantage here of the extent of the new innovation and the extent to which it's better than the previous, but it's also looking at the innovation that one company is doing versus the innovation that its competitors are doing, which may be taking them in a different direction. Which one is better? Which one's going to take the customers? The compatibility I mentioned earlier, well, the degree to which new innovation is consistent with current values, experiences, and needs. Does it suit us? Is the product acceptable to us? And also, if it's a production system, as I said in the previous slide, the innovations should fit in with the overall production system within the business. Otherwise, the company would have to reinvest in all of their capital, perhaps, to make a certain product. Companies don't like doing that. They prefer to look at a piece of machinery that's come on the market, which is an innovative piece of machinery, but they want it to fit in with the rest of their equipment. So customers look for compatibility, but so also do the producers. And the complexity point, well, the innovation must be easy to understand by the customers. It can't be too complex. But also, I said earlier that the complexity can be used as a barrier to entry. The need to have it, a lot of the product should be so complex that it deters competitors, or at least it slows the competitors down. So on the one hand, it should be easy to use by the customers, but difficult to copy, difficult for competitors to get an identical product for sale in the market. Difficult for them to make. Trialability, I mentioned, well, the degree to which the product can be tested by customers, a trial period, as I said, perhaps test driving a car, making sure that the car meets the customer's expectations. And observability, well, the customer's benefits and the innovations, I should say, benefits and features should be visible to the customer. It can be through observation, or it can be through word of mouth. The point is that the customers will be interested in the product if they can see that it is truly an innovation, if it is truly and genuinely a change for the better. So it should be observable. They should be able to check it themselves. They should be able to see that this is a different product from the previous one. It's a better product. The channels of communication. Well, the channels of communication is the process of sharing information between individuals and customers. Sometimes the company will share its ideas with the customers through marketing, through advertising, or through promotions of one type or another. That's the company sending the message to the customers. But the customers can also send a message back. The most powerful message coming back from the customers is through the market mechanism, either buying the product or not buying the product. That's the most powerful one. But they could also send it back through focus groups, through surveys, through falling sales figures, not necessarily cutting off the product completely, but just buying less of it. All of these are channels of communications that operate within the market system. Mass media is a communications channel which helps marketers communicate information about an innovation. So the mass media being papers, television, radio, the internet, posters, flyers, even word of mouth. It's effective in gaining product knowledge. The customers use it to find out about products. If we're thinking of buying something new, we may go online to check what sort of products and functionality are available, who produces them, the price, and we also may go to local shops and stores and talk to our friends and before we make a purchase. Of course, it all depends on the price of the product. If it's a very expensive product, we'll certainly engage in a lot of search to try and find more information. If it's a cheap product, then the chances are we're not going to spend a lot of time checking it. We might ask a few friends or perhaps go online and just check to see what's there and then go off to the local shop and purchase it. Whatever. But the price, the more expensive it is, the more extensive our search will tend to be. Interpersonal communication is a method adopted in influencing and changing attitudes about an innovation. Word of mouth is an effective communications method, as customers trust their friends and family rather than mass media. So interpersonal communication is very important in the whole process. We trust our friends and family. We don't necessarily trust somebody online who sends us a spam message to say their product is the best. We would certainly rule that one out, chances are. So interpersonal communications is important as a channel of communications. And when there is an innovation, interpersonal communication is important. When people say, I just bought a new iPhone, or I bought a Samsung, or I bought a particular phone of whatever type, and it's wonderful. That may influence us. If they say they bought a particular phone and they find it's not very good, that may put us off. So interpersonal communications is very important. Now, the rate of diffusion. Well, time refers to the rate of diffusion. How long does it take for an innovation to be adopted by a social group? So that's the rate of diffusion. How long does it take for a particular social group to take over that particular innovation? How long did it take for mobile phones, as they were, to become established in society? How long does it take for a particular innovation in television to become adopted? Or perhaps a new way of recording music or voice, a new type of sound file. How long would it take for that to become established? And the dream of the innovator is to have their innovation adopted. But they must start with the first customer, and they must try and build it up to a large number perhaps, and to do that over a given period of time. The longer it takes, the slower the rate of diffusion. But if all of the channels of communication we talked about earlier are working in favor of the diffusion or of the innovation, then the diffusion will be very rapid. It's only if those channels of communication are not working in favor of the innovation that will slow it down. The rate of diffusion follows a bell-shaped curve, which illustrates the time it takes for a customer to adopt an innovation. And we'll talk about this later on in these notes. But we can imagine a normal type distribution, that sort of shape for innovations to come into existence, to be adopted, and then to be adopted on a large scale by a large number, and then to go out of fashion, decline. If they're not kept contemporary, they will decline in fashion or in desirability, and they will leave the market. We'll talk about this later. There are 5 adopter categories identified by Rogers, and we'll talk about the diagram that's coming up soon, but it illustrates the rate at which an innovation is adopted by customers. Not all customers adopt an innovation at the same time. Some may hang back, some may love innovation and want to be the first to have it. Others want to see how it's working and what are the downsides associated with the innovation, what are the issues, what are the complaints, and come in much later. So that's the type of shape we're talking about. These are not stages that individuals pass through, rather categories of people. So we can imagine it's starting down on the left-hand side, down towards the origin of the diagram. We have the innovators, the ones who really want to have this product first. They love new products. They love new ideas. They want to be the first ones to get it. These are the ones who queue up outside the Apple shop when a new product comes out. They want to be the first to get it. And the same happens with other products, not just the Apple phones. Then the next lot are the early adopters, the ones who, they want to be amongst the first, but they're not necessarily that keen. They don't go on the day it's released. They might go a couple of weeks later, but they're early adopters. They have the product, generally speaking, before most people. And then you have the early majority who they're a big proportion of the population. They just want to have the product. They're early, but they just don't want to be seen as being left behind. They adopt the product on the early side. There might be some who hang back a bit later, a bit more conservative, a bit more traditional. These are the late majority. And then you've got the ones on the right-hand side, the extreme right-hand side, the laggards. These are the ones who lag behind everyone. They adopted, but they might adopt it a year later or whenever. They might adopt it way down the line. They're not interested in being seen as being the first to have it or being amongst the first to have it. They don't care about that. They'll get it eventually. These are the laggards. So the innovators, the ones on just go back to the diagram. The innovators are on the bottom left-hand side, near the origin. The innovators are 2.5%. I mean, that figure is just an often quoted figure. It's not necessarily a statistical figure. These are the first 2.5% of the population to adopt an innovation in a social system. These are the ones who, as I said, love something new. They are keen to try new innovations and ideas. These individuals are referred to as venturesome and risk takers. And very little effort is exerted to appeal to this category. The companies don't have to work hard to try and sell the idea to them. These people love something new and they're going to buy it anyway. So the company doesn't have to work hard to make sales to this group. This group are already fired up to get the product. So they're looking forward to a new innovation, a new change, a new set of ideas, a new product, and they will adopt it because that's their mentality. They like newness. The innovator is key in the diffusion process. The innovator is connected to the social system, which allows the flow of new ideas. So getting this small proportion of the population, the ones who really love new ideas, getting them to adopt it, it will spread out from there. Their friends and their friends' friends will start to see it in use. And in that way, the idea will spread. It'll diffuse. It'll diffuse out from these. The idea of the innovation will spread because the innovators, the people who adopt the idea very quickly, they're going to show their family, their friends. The family and friends will talk to others, and eventually the idea will spread out. Early adopters. Well, if we look at the early adopters, they're the next ones along the line, 13.5%. They're around 13.5% of the population that adopt innovation. This category take fewer risks than the innovators. They stand back a little. They want to make sure that this innovation is going to work. That it's a good idea, that unforeseen problems are not going to just pop up. They want to make sure that it's good value for money, that it does what it says, and there are no issues. There are no recalls of the product because it went wrong or whatever. They stand back a little and watch. They tend to observe innovators before they decide to adopt the innovation. Early adopters are vital in the communications process as they are integrated into a social system and have higher numbers of opinion leaders and role models. So the early adopters, they're not overly keen, but they are keen, but they're not overly keen. The innovators are the ones who want it. They want it on the day it comes out. They're the ones who are very keen. The early adopters will stand back for a bit and perhaps let a couple of weeks pass before they get it. And what they're doing is looking for information. Was the product a success? Have there been any issues? Have there been any errors built up in the thing, or any breakdowns, or how is it performing? Does it meet expectations? And if all the boxes are ticked, they will then acquire the innovative product. Now, the early majority, the 34%, early majority is just almost in the center, just to the left of the timeline in the center. Early majority, 34%. Now, these are the 34% of the population that adopt the innovation. This category wait and see if the innovation works before they adopt. The diffusion process is longer than innovators and early adopters. They take their time. They're waiting even longer than the previous category to see if everything's okay. They're not rushing to buy it. They don't need to show off that they've got this product. They're content with what they've got. They will change, but they'll do it in their time. And generally speaking, they'll do it a bit before everybody else, but they're not in a big hurry at the same time. They tend to have above average in education, age, income, and rely mostly on research and information before adopting an innovation. So they're much more astute. They're not impulsive. The innovators are impulsive. They won't rush straight in and buy it. The next category, waiting to see a little, get some information before they adopt. But this lot, the early majority, well, they are doing their research. They're checking. They're talking to people. They're going online, reading reviews, seeing what the market's saying, watching the news, the tech news, perhaps if it's a technological project. If it's not, watching the relevant markets. And finally, when they're convinced, they'll make the purchase. So they're not rushing in. That's the point. The late majority, well, this is the 34%. I'll just go back to it. The late majority, you can see just near the time on the horizontal axis, just to the right of it. Late majority, 34%. This category is perceived as skeptical and only adopt the innovation if there is an economic necessity or social pressure. So this category, they're not that keen. They They will adopt it if there's pressure for them to do it, if there's a good need for them to do it. But they're not going to rush out and change a product which they've got and which is perhaps working and working satisfactorily for them. They're not going to rush off and just buy it because it's new. They're going to hang back, use the one they've got until it runs out completely, until it expires. So they are not going to spend money just to have something new. But if the social system is such that there's pressure on them to keep up with the proverbial Joneses or keep up with the neighbours or their peer groups or whatever, then they may be, in a sense, forced into making the purchase. But they themselves think it's a waste. They've got a perfectly good product that's working at the moment. Why change it for this innovative product? The innovative product will have new functionality, but they may not necessarily want that functionality. That does not interest them so much. A lot of the work on new phones have emphasized the importance of pictures and cameras and so on, but a lot of people may not want that. They may not take a lot of pictures. They want different functionality. They want to be able to check the news and go online, or that sort of technology is more interesting to them. So it may be that this group simply are not interested in what the developers think that customers are interested in. So they just hang back. But as I said, social pressure, peer group pressure may lead them to make the purchase. But they certainly will not make an early purchase. They'll make a purchase eventually. Now the laggards, 16%. These are on the right, the extreme right, and you can see these are the percentage adopting. Well, these are very low percentages. This category is the last to adopt an innovation. They are perceived to be traditional and prefer customs and are focused on the past. They prefer to do things the traditional way. They're not really that keen on the product. They're not that pushed. So they will get it eventually, but only when everything else has failed and when they can't get an alternative, perhaps cheaper alternative, that satisfies their particular requirements. They're the hardest group to persuade to adopt an innovation, as they're very suspicious and don't like change. They don't want to change very easily. The innovation must be a necessity for them to consider adoption. They'll only take it on if they really have to. Otherwise, they'll just leave it. They'll leave it for as long as they can. If they have to take it on, they will buy it. But otherwise, that innovation does not mean anything to them. So these are the factors that we need to consider when we talk about diffusion of innovation and how innovation spreads throughout society. And that's all we're going to deal with in this session. So let's leave it at that and say thank you for watching.